My name is Bertie Ahern and you're listening to the Ireland Podcast.
Hello, welcome to the Ireland Podcast. This is Fender Jackson. The time is 2:49 on Monday, the 15th of June 2026. I am in Belfast with this person. Who are you and what do you do?
I am John Manley. I'm political correspondent with the Irish News.
No pressure in your job at all then?
Not at all. It's a walk in the park every day.
How long have you been here?
I've been with the Irish News for at least a quarter of a century.
Wow.
So I freelanced here from 1999 and I was made staff in 2000.
John, thanks for your time today. I'm really interested in giving an insight as to what's been happening in Belfast in light of the recent events. So can you explain what the recent events are and how we got here?
Okay, well, last Monday night, that would be June the 12th, I believe, there was an incident in North Belfast that was widely shared on social media. It was a video of a black gentleman sitting astride of another man on the ground, and the black gentleman was armed with a knife. Now this is subject of a police investigation and things, so I'll not elaborate too much on what happened. Someone intervened in this case with a hurley bat and hit the assailant with the hurley bat, and the police arrived on the scene, and it turns out that the victim, Stephen Ogilvie, I think a 44-year-old, was then subsequently hospitalised with serious injuries. I believe he remains in a critical condition, and the gentleman then who with the knife transpired was a Sudanese national who was living here legally, had applied for asylum. He has since been charged with attempted murder. His name is Hadi Al-Odid.
And consequently, what happened thereafter?
So this triggered what appears to be a concerted reaction across social media, with many sort of far-right activists just generally saying enough is enough. This is what the sort of stuff that people are enduring on an everyday basis. Now it's worth pointing out that Northern Ireland is the least racially diverse part of the United Kingdom. There has been an increase in immigration in recent years, but that's almost from zero level. We rely on immigrant workers for many of our industries, the agri-food industry, low-paid industry like the agri-food industry, and our health service is dependent on many migrant workers. But what has happened then is we've got what was billed as peaceful protests took place. Now it's important to point out these took place in mostly unionist areas. You would find that Nationalist, Republican and the Middle Ground Alliance Party would be sort of very condemning of this sort of racist behaviour or anything with racist undertones or overtones. So this was something that was largely confined to unionist areas, and the apparently peaceful protests quickly turned nasty. You may have seen the footage screened internationally of young men, masked men, going from house to house in East Belfast, knocking on doors, subsequently people being burnt out of their homes, cars being burnt out, people having to be rescued by the police. There's an incident where a nurse and her family were bundled into the back of a police jeep because the fear was that they would soon be burnt out of their home.
Wow. And is it I haven't been keeping abreast of the news. I've been away at the weekend, so has it stopped?
It seems to have dissipated a bit. There was, that was on Wednesday. I think on Thursday night was when it was at its height. There were still, sort of isolated incidents over the weekend, but I don't think, there's been any evidence of large crowds gathering over the weekend, and hopefully there'll be no repeat of it tonight.
So how do you account for the word groundswell is coming into my mind? The groundswell of the protesters. So they were out in big numbers. How do you account for that?
Well, a groundswell would suggest it's organic. I would personally account for that. I would say the influence of unionist / loyalist paramilitaries in this. Now, the Chief Constable, PSNI Chief Constable John Boucher, has said there's no evidence to suggest that. I have no evidence. I haven't been out on the ground. I have no evidence to contradict that, but I would say that, this is Northern Ireland. Things don't happen in those communities without, the approval of loyalist paramilitaries, whether they be the UDA or the UVF.
This is now becoming an annual event?
Yeah, well, in recent years, if we go back 2 years ago, we had riots in the Sandy Road, Donegal Road area. Racist riots were...
And was there a catalyst for that? Was there something that happened?
I'm trying to think what occurred on that occasion. I think that may have been in response to the Southport riots, the Southport killings, if I'm not mistaken. I don't think there was anything locally that triggered it.
The same way as,
to the best of my recollection.
Same way as this has triggered events in Britain.
Yeah. So, that's what we had, and a number of businesses were destroyed and burnt in South Belfast, which again is a unionist area, although it sort of spilled over into the student area around Botanic Avenue and different things, which wouldn't be considered a sort of hotbed of loyalism.
What, the students were out protesting?
No. Just the quite in the Sandy Row would be quite close to that area, and whereas the residents of Sandy Row and the Donegal Road would tend to keep themselves to themselves. I think just the violence spread, a few streets away, no matter of 100 yards, businesses were destroyed. So that was 2 years ago. Last year in Ballymena, another area of unionist loyalist area, there were attacks on houses owned by members of the Roma community. That was apparently triggered by accusations of sexual assault or attempted rape by a number of teenagers who were members of the Roma community. Subsequently, that was found to be without foundation, or at least the complaint was withdrawn. Mm-hmm. So there was no evidence of rape, but in the meantime, houses were wrecked.
Mm. A question popped into my head last night, which was, are we in a trust recession? And I'm thinking about COVID and the distrust of all of that. I interviewed the director of European Medicines Agency, Emer Cook. She's a Dubliner based in Amsterdam. And I was asking her about the faith in institutions. So is there a faith in media? I'm thinking about your side of the fence, or rather my side of the fence, in terms of the, whatever you want to call it, legacy media or whatever. Is there a lack of trust in that area, and what's happened, what has brought that about, and how does it regain its trust?
Well, that's you might say is part of a global pattern. Interesting, I suppose, in Northern Ireland, because we've traditionally had media which served, respective communities. I, for example, work for the Irish News, which traditionally has served the nationalist community. You would have that, trust deficit already existed with members of the opposing community, so
Yes.
they wouldn't necessarily believe what they read in the Irish news, and likewise members of the nationalist community wouldn't believe or put much stead in what they believe in the newsletter. So yes, there is, yes, you've seen the sort of undermining of trust in institutions generally across the world. Yes, that happens here. It seems more acute in there's a sense that working class unionist communities are a little more lost than their nationalist and Republican counterparts. They lack political representation. There's widespread educational underachievement in these working class unionist communities, and also notably that there's a greater demand for housing among the nationalist Republican community. Okay, so if you go into a working class area in West Belfast, you might struggle to find an empty house. There was a time when, in unionist, loyalist areas, there were a lot of empty houses. And these seem to then have, because rents have fallen, these would be the first call of foreign nationals that come in, because there is an availability of housing, a greater availability of housing. Likewise, the same thing comes to retail premises as well. And in many ways, while these are the very people that are sort of revitalising these communities through their opening businesses, through, and simply living in houses, there's also that has created tension among the existing communities.
Wow. People who are coming into the country will have less money, and they'll go to where the housing is cheaper. And that tends to be more deprived areas.
Yeah.
So they're more embedded in these societies, and that's where this disparity of cultures and the not seeing eye to eye, and it flares up. That stacks up for you.
Yeah, that's it. And as I've said to you, there is a greater availability of housing now. That maybe that doesn't exist to the same extent, simply because those migrants have come and they've filled those houses, But it is in sort of inner city, what we call in local parlance loyalist areas, that many of these people have settled because of the availability of housing.
How do you rebuild trust in terms of? Well, is it fair to say that trust has dropped within even your side of the community? I'm thinking about just the distrust in media globally.
I think just because it's not so much a distrust, but people get their news and their information from so many different sources now. Whereas respectfully, Fender, when you and I were growing up, we had 2 or 3 TV channels.
Yes.
But now there are numerous sources, some official, some non-official.
Yeah.
Whether someone reading their phone gives as much credibility to the BBC as an anonymous account on X. Depending what they're saying, people and as people like their own views very often reinforced by their news outlets. So I'm not sure that distrust on the nationalist side is there as much as possible, because without opening a separate can of worms, there is a sort of a progressive alliance, not just necessarily of the left, because it goes right through to the liberal centre ground, but it would push back against racism, against misogyny, against sectarianism. Whereas, this within the unionism, this siege mentality breeds a suspicion of the other. These are people that are continually feel under threat, have felt under threat for hundreds of years. It's almost like a folk memory. So they're always on the defensive, and there is a sense if you listen to working class unionists, they would say they've got nothing from the peace process. Now, their community leaders have benefited from the peace process. There's been lots of money put in to these communities, but the outcomes haven't been the same. There are subtle, nuanced cultural differences between, the Republican nationalist community and the loyalist unionist community that to the outsider they wouldn't get. But I'll give you an example. You can be a Republican and you become a university lecturer, right? You're still a Republican, okay? You may get a big house up the Malone Road, one of the more prosperous areas of Belfast, but you're still a Republican. If you're a loyalist and you go to university, you get yourself, some qualifications and you become a university lecturer, almost miraculously, you're a unionist. You're no longer a loyalist. So it's a very classist sort of term that people use. And there's whereas the Republican and nationalist working classes have people from those communities articulating their concerns and seeking, electoral representation. You don't have that with a working class unionist community. You don't have it to the same degree. The unionism, there's a classism inside it, which goes a long way to explaining this and why those communities feel so abandoned.
What's the answer?
Some might say United Ireland. That is the ultimate answer. To give these people a sense of belonging and a sense of worth. But political unionism doesn't want them. You would have seen there was a fracturing of relations between the working class unionists and the sort of middle class political unionism at the time of the Good Friday Agreement. You got the emergence of what were called the fringe loyalist parties. Progressive Unionist Party represented, was the political spokespersons of the UVF. The Ulster Democratic Party was the spokesperson of the UDA. You may remember a guy called David Irvine.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah. And David Irvine represented that. And he was critical of, mainstream unionism, of its, a big house unionism, as it's often called, that gave, would simply use the working classes when they needed them to agitate, would, wind them up, would get them, fill them with sectarianism and tell them that, the people who are living in the same conditions, simply though, they are their co-religionists, but they have a different idea about the body of Christ or whatever, the silly little things about religion. No, that's just, it is an ethnic conflict. I'm perhaps making light of it by saying it's about religion. But that, the unionism has never properly sought to help the working classes.
That's a fascinating point that you're making. What gives you hope for the future? If this has been going on for now 3 summers in a row, what gives you hope that it won't happen for a 4th? Or even for 3.5? Well,
there needs to be in the first instance, a security response. People need to be jailed for violent, intimidatory behaviour, need to be made an example of, and that will, to an extent, discourage others. But how you tackle this idea, and then it is racism. It's
whenever you're burning people out of their houses for the colour of their skin, it's very hard to see it a different way.
Yes, and there are a few people who will seek to, intellectualise and apologise for that. Saying, "Oh, look at these poor fellas," they have no self-worth, they once had the shipyard, but now they have nothing,
You're talking about
it just removes their agency completely.
Yeah. You're talking about the people in the communities, the loyalist communities. Yeah. Wow. So what gives you hope?
I don't have a great deal of hope, I would have to say. I think this is a very a dangerous situation, and my heart goes out to those individuals who, whether they be people fleeing warfare, whether it be in Sudan, Somalia, Syria. Them and those people, just those economic migrants, whether they come from, the Philippines or wherever, they're all tarred with the same brush, and I would, unionism needs to show leadership. They may have concerns about open borders, but at the same time, and an example, and I'm not tarring unionists with the same brush. Our health minister, Mike Nesbitt, who is potentially one of the exceptions, in that his language is always moderate and measured. Mike Nesbitt on the BBC yesterday stressing, how this is a stain on Northern Ireland's reputation, what occurred last week, and it will simply discourage people from coming here. And that will, with the shifting demographics and our aging population, that will create, great difficulties further down the line. As Mike Nesbitt pointed out, these are the people that are doing the jobs that don't appeal to, people who are brought up here. So, when it comes to manning the health or, staffing the health service, we'll encounter difficulties.
And where's your time? You've got a busy job. Not only is it busy, but it's funny whenever you're talking about all the three-letter acronyms and thinking about how complicated it is for, I get it, but I grew up here. But for people listening, it's like a smorgasbord of TLAs, of three-letter acronyms, and you get the wrong letter, you're on the wrong side of the fence. So sometimes maybe. Is there anything you would like to say that you haven't said already?
Well, no, I am encouraged, and people, we had a demonstration at Belfast City Hall on Saturday, an anti-racism demonstration, and, while some were poking fun at it, I was amused by someone pointing out that it was very diverse in that it was populated by men with beards and men without beards, but that's dismissive of what was a strong showing of solidarity with foreign nationals, whether they're here seeking asylum or whether they're here legally to work, and of course asylum being legal status as well, I'd point out. It gives me hope that those people are in the majority. They may be dismissed as middle class latte drinking elite, but ultimately they are the people with power who can, hopefully help shape a society that is more tolerant. I really think, as I say, I believe the unionist leadership, needs to lead by example and be much more tolerant in its language, because they are adopting every culture war. You may find as we get closer to the prospect of a united Ireland, and the constitutional issue becomes much more of a hot topic, that unionism then chooses other battles, whether it be about transgender rights, open borders, these sorts of things, that they're embarking on culture wars. That's a dangerous situation, and not one that I welcome.
John, thank you very much for your time.
You're welcome, Fender. Thank you.
Slam. Thank you for listening. If you know someone who might value this conversation, please feel free to pass it on. The Ireland podcast is intended as a record of long-form conversations like this. And if you would like to support the continuation of the work, there is a link in the notes. Take care.